The palace was silent, its golden halls dimmed beneath the weight of the night. Jin Rui had dismissed her attendants hours ago, choosing solitude over ceremony. But as she walked through the imperial garden, past the koi-filled ponds and towering cherry blossom trees, she sensed she was not alone. She turned. There, standing in the moonlit shadows, was Zhao Luan. His navy robes, embroidered with silver, blended with the night, but his gaze burned through the darkness. For the first time since she had claimed the throne, he was not standing at her side as a protector. He was simply there, watching her, waiting. She should have turned away, should have let the moment pass, but she didn't. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured, her voice softer than she intended. Zhao Luan tilted his head, a slow, knowing smirk playing at his lips. "And yet, here I am." His voice was smooth, dangerously so. Jin Rui exhaled. "The court expects me to take a husband soon." Something flickered in his expression, a flash of something unreadable. "And will you?" he asked, stepping closer. She held her ground, lifting her chin. "The throne is mine alone. I will not be ruled." A slow, amused breath escaped him. "Of course not," he murmured. "No one could ever rule you." Then he reached for her. His fingers brushed against her wrist, just barely, but the touch was electric. Her breath hitched. "I never asked you why you defied the Emperor's orders," Jin Rui said, searching his face. Zhao Luan smirked, but it lacked its usual sharpness. "Because I don't take orders well." His eyes gleamed. "Only from you." She should have pulled away, should have told him this was dangerous, but she didn't, because deep down she already knew. She had never been fighting alone. Through every war, every betrayal, every game of power, he had always been there, not as a rival, not as a shadow, but as something more, something she had been too afraid to name, until now. Zhao Luan's hand lifted to her cheek, his touch slow, careful, as if waiting for her to stop him. She didn't. "You were never meant to rule alone," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. Jin Rui didn't move, didn't breathe. She could have ended this before it began, could have reminded him that she was an empress, that emotions were weaknesses in court. But she had already won the empire. Now she wanted something else. Her hand moved first, fingers grazing his jaw, pulling him just a fraction closer. Zhao Luan's smirk vanished. His eyes darkened, his restraint slipping. Then he kissed her. It was not hesitant, not careful. It was a collision, fire meeting fire, a storm that had been waiting to break. And for the first time in a long time, Jin Rui did not think. She let herself feel. When they finally broke apart, the world felt different. The cherry blossoms swayed around them, their petals landing in Zhao Luan's dark hair, but neither moved to brush them away. Jin Rui exhaled slowly. "This changes nothing." Zhao Luan smirked, breathless. "It changes everything." She should have denied it, should have turned and left. Instead, she let him pull her into another kiss, because for all her power, all her victories, this was the one battle she didn't mind losing. The palace was a place of secrets and shadows, and Jin Rui and Zhao Luan had become masters of both. Now that they had admitted their feelings, they could no longer keep away from each other. A glance across the court, a fleeting touch when no one was looking, a stolen moment in a quiet corridor where his fingers brushed against hers before she disappeared into the night. Every meeting was a risk, but neither of them cared. They found each other behind silk curtains and towering screens, between palace columns where moonlight barely touched. Their whispers filled the empty spaces, soft, urgent, forbidden. But whispers travel, and someone noticed. Servants lowered their voices when Jin Rui passed. Court officials glanced at her too long. A high-ranking noblewoman hid a knowing smile behind her fan. The palace was not blind. Rumors spread like fire. Zhao Luan had never been patient. For months they had met in secret, always hiding, always careful, but not anymore. One night, when the court was quiet and the lanterns flickered against the evening wind, he led her away. Away from the whispers, away from the watching eyes, to a hidden garden bathed in silver moonlight, where lanterns floated in the air like stars. The scent of night-blooming flowers filled the space between them. Jin Rui turned to him, her golden eyes questioning, "Why here?" Zhao Luan did not answer, not with words. Instead, he knelt, not as a prince, not as a rival, but as a man who had been fighting for her long before she even knew it. "Jin Rui," he murmured, his voice low and steady, filled with something raw and real. "Marry me." No titles, no courtly speech, just a promise. Jin Rui's breath caught. She should have thought of the consequences, of the politics, of the war that would follow. But for once, she didn't care. She stepped forward, her hands finding his, warm and unshaken. And then she said yes, immediately, no hesitation, because she was done denying what she wanted. And this time, she would not let anything stand in her way. The moment Jin Rui accepted Zhao Luan's proposal, she knew the battle was only beginning. The next morning, the palace buzzed with whispers. The servants did not dare speak of it openly, but their stolen glances said enough. Something had shifted, and by midday, the court was in chaos. The imperial court erupted like a battlefield. Noblemen, ministers, and generals roared their objections before the emperor's throne. "An empress cannot choose her own husband," one of the elders bellowed. "This is reckless, dangerous. A marriage of love or a dangerous alliance?" Jin Rui stood her ground, her face unmoved, her golden eyes sharp. Across from her, Zhao Luan sat in silence, his expression unreadable. He did not argue, did not justify, because he did not need to. He had fought battles with swords. Now, he let Jin Rui fight with words. One of the oldest ministers stepped forward, bowing deeply, but Jin Rui saw the steel in his gaze. "The late emperor may have chosen this union," he began, "but he is gone, and the empire is no longer his to shape." Jin Rui's fingers curled at her sides, a direct challenge to the emperor's decree. Another noble spoke, his voice cold, sharp. "This is not about love. This is about power." He turned to the court. "If Prince Zhao Luan weds the empress, he will not simply be her consort. He will be her shadow, her advisor, her sword." His lips curled. "And tell me, ministers, does this not make him the most dangerous man in the empire?" A ripple of unease spread through the court. "An empress must be wed for the good of the realm," another elder argued, "not for her own heart." Jin Rui exhaled slowly. There it was, the truth hidden beneath all their excuses. They did not care for tradition, they cared for control, and they feared losing it. A lesser ruler might have pleaded, might have softened her words. Jin Rui did not. She let the silence stretch, long enough for discomfort to settle, for their own doubts to creep in. Then, her voice rang clear, cold, and final. "Tell me," she said, "which of you feared Duke Ren? Which of you once stood in favor of Mei Lin?" A ripple of discomfort spread through the ministers. "You opposed me before," she continued, stepping forward. "And yet, here I stand, Empress." Her golden eyes burned. "I will not ask for your approval. I will not wait for your blessing. This is not a request." The room fell into silence, and in that moment, they knew they had already lost. Zhao Wenzi rose to his feet, the first prince, the emperor's favored heir, a man who had waited, watched, and played the long game. The court fell silent. His lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. "You may have the late emperor's favor now," Wenzi said, "but favor is fleeting." Jin Rui stilled. She had expected opposition, but not from him. Wenzi continued, his voice smooth, measured, the voice of a strategist. "If you wed my brother, you will divide the court." A ripple of unease spread through the hall. "You are already resented," he said. "Make the wrong move, and you will be overthrown before you can even bear an heir." The threat hung in the air, heavy as a blade. Jin Rui's fingers curled into fists. "Is that a warning?" she asked, her voice sharp as steel. Zhao Wenji's smile did not fade. "It is a fact." She saw it now. Zhao Wenzi was not protecting the empire. He was protecting his own power. A soft chuckle echoed across the throne room. Jin Rui turned. Leaning against a polished column, arms crossed, eyes glinting with amusement, stood Zhao Luan's younger brother, Prince Liang Wei. Unlike Wenzi, he did not hide behind false civility. His smirk was mocking, his posture too relaxed for a man standing at the center of a battle. "You must truly be mad, Luan," he drawled, "to think you can wed an empress and not pay a price." His tone was too casual, too amused, which meant he was planning something. Jin Rui did not blink. And what price would that be? Liang Wei's smirk widened. War. The court fell silent. The word hung heavy in the air. Liang Wei pushed off the pillar, walking toward them with slow, unhurried steps. "If you marry Zhao Luan," he continued lazily, "the noble houses who oppose you will not stand idle. They will revolt. And when they do," he tilted his head, smiling as if this were some grand game, "who do you think they will ask to replace you?" Jin Rui understood. This was not about marriage. This was about control. Zhao Wenji and Liang Wei had waited, had bid their time, and now they had found their opening. Zhao Wenji does not want Zhao Luan to gain influence. If Zhao Luan marries Jin Rui, he becomes more than a prince. He becomes the most powerful man in the empire. Wenzi wants to keep Jin Rui isolated. No allies, no family, easier to control. Liang Wei wants chaos. He doesn't want Wenzi to have the throne. He doesn't want Jin Rui to have power. He wants the nobles to rebel, because in chaos he can seize control. Neither of them care about Zhao Luan. They are brothers by blood, but enemies by ambition. This is not about family. This is about power. Jin Rui's throne was not secure, and if she wanted to keep both her empire and her love, she would have to fight for them. The court held its breath. Zhao Wenji's words had cast a shadow of doubt. Liang Wei's threat of war hung over the chamber like an unsheathed blade. And yet, Jin Rui did not flinch. She had faced assassins, betrayals, and armies before. 2 scheming princes? They would not be the ones to break her. Jin Rui did not attack head-on. She let them tear each other apart. Whispers had already begun. Some noble houses feared war. Others feared Wenzi and Liang Wei's rise to power more than they feared her. Jin Rui had her spies spread the perfect rumors. If Zhao Wenji removes the empress, will he not also remove those who once stood by her? If Liang Wei sows rebellion, who will truly benefit? The nobles or himself? If the empress falls, who will be next? By the time the nobles realized what was happening, they were too busy fighting among themselves to unite against her. While her enemies schemed, Jin Rui built her empire. She secured House Chen's wealth, ensuring the economy was under her control. She earned the loyalty of military generals who had fought beside her adoptive father. They respected her not because of her title, but because of her victories. And she sent messages to regional governors, offering them protection, trade benefits, and the one thing Duke Ren never had: trust. If war came, she would not be the one losing. The first prince played the long game, so Jin Rui played it better. She offered him something he could not refuse: a control over a region he had always wanted. But there was a catch. If he accepted, he could not openly move against her. If he refused, he would expose his true ambitions to the court. Either way, Jin Rui won. Liang Wei was reckless, arrogant, and weakness in court was a death sentence. Jin Rui dug until she found it: a secret affair, a scandal involving a debt unpaid to a ruthless noble, a moment of carelessness that would ruin his credibility forever. When the whispers reached the court, Liang Wei's reputation was shattered. A prince without respect or influence is just a shadow, and Jin Rui had made sure his shadow would never touch her throne again. The game was over. The nobles were divided. The generals were hers. Zhao Wenji was trapped. Liang Wei was ruined. Now, Jin Rui and Zhao Luan could take what was theirs, not through war, not because they asked permission, but because by the time war was an option, they had already won. Jin Rui had outmaneuvered them, but she was not naive. Her enemies may have been weakened, but they were not gone. So she did not wait. She prepared. She made a statement: if they seek war, I will give them war. She tested the loyalty of the military. She secured the generals, making it clear that if war comes, the empire stands with her. She made an example of one traitor. The message was clear: defy me, and you will fall. Zhao Luan was not just the man she loved. He was her blade. He moved in the shadows, speaking to spies, uncovering plots before they could take root. He ensured that no assassination attempts reached her. He confronted those who still doubted her rule, reminding them she is not alone. And when the court whispered of whether he would be a mere consort, Zhao Luan simply smirked. I am not here to rule, he said. I am here to make sure no one takes her crown. Now, there was no one left to stand against them. The nobles were divided. The military was loyal. The traitors were dealt with. The court was silent. Now, there was nothing left to stop them. Jin Rui and Zhao Luan would marry. The battle was won. The throne was hers. And now, so was he. Jin Rui did not marry out of duty. Not for power. Not for alliances. She married because she wanted to. The capital was transformed. For 3 days and 3 nights, lanterns illuminated the streets. Banners of crimson and gold fluttered from the palace walls, and the sound of celebration echoed across the empire. No expense was spared. Silk banners embroidered with golden phoenixes lined the palace gates. Drums thundered through the streets as performers reenacted her greatest victories. House Qian, now one of her strongest allies, funded a feast so grand that nobles and commoners alike would remember it for generations. But even as the empire celebrated, the court watched, because this was not just a wedding. This was the coronation of an unshakable union. This was the moment Jin Rui made it clear. Zhao Luan was not her weakness. He was her choice, and no one would take him from her. The grand hall of the palace shimmered with golden light, the scent of incense curling through the air. Jin Rui stood at the center, dressed in a crimson hanfu woven with golden dragons, her hair adorned with delicate jade pins and a phoenix crown, the symbol of an empress who ruled in her own right. She did not kneel. She did not lower her gaze. She stood as an empress should, proud, powerful, untouchable. And then he entered. Zhao Luan, dressed in midnight silk embroidered with silver clouds, his dark hair tied back, his every step unhurried, unshaken. He was not a man being led to the altar. He was a man who had chosen to stand beside her. As he reached her, Jinrui met his gaze, intense, unwavering, burning with everything they had not been allowed to say until now. And in that moment, the world disappeared. It was just them. A priest stepped forward, ready to recite the ceremonial vows. But before he could speak, Jinrui raised a hand. The room fell silent, and she spoke. "Zhao Luan." Her voice rang through the hall. "You have fought beside me. You have bled for me. You have defied kings and courts, not as my shadow, but as my equal." Her golden eyes burned. "Today, I do not take you as a consort. I do not take you as a subject. I take you as my partner, as my sword, as my home." The court held its breath. Zhao Luan exhaled slowly, and then he smiled. He reached for her hands, his grip warm, steady, unshaken. "Jinrui," he murmured, his voice like a promise. "I was never meant to be a prince. I was never meant to rule, but I was always meant to stand beside you." His fingers tightened. "From the day we first met in the imperial forest, I have only ever fought for one thing, and that is you." He bowed his head, but not in submission, in devotion. And then he looked up, smirking, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "You were never meant to kneel, so I will kneel for you instead." The entire court gasped. Zhao Luan dropped to one knee before her, not as a consort, but as a warrior who had chosen his empress. And the empire trembled, because for centuries, an empress's husband was meant to rule alongside her. Yet here, before the entire court, Zhao Luan had declared it differently. He would not rule her. He would fight for her. It was a moment that would be written in history. Jinrui looked down at him, at the only person in the world who had ever stood at her side without trying to control her, and she smiled. She reached down, lifting him back to his feet. "Then stand with me," she whispered, and Zhao Luan did. The ceremonial crowns were placed upon their heads. The court bowed. The empire rejoiced. And that night, as Jinrui and Zhao Luan stood on the palace balcony, looking over the land they had fought for, she knew. This was just the beginning. There would be battles ahead, enemies who still lurked in the shadows, challenges they had yet to face, but now they would face them together. And no one would ever question who truly ruled the empire, because Jinrui had never been meant to survive. She had been meant to reign, and now she would. What did you learn from this story? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you never miss an update. Don't forget to share this video with someone who would love it. Thank you so much for your love and support.